Wanted to talk about Hurricane Dorian. It has intensified into a hurricane. Earlier this afternoon, it really started wrapping up as it passed to the east of Puerto Rico. Down here, this is an infrared satellite image we're looking at from Tropical Tidbits, a very great website. I would recommend supporting them on Patreon and giving them your full attention for this because they do a great job covering all kinds of tropical cyclones and they're very knowledgeable about the topic and give great discussion about it. But in terms of Dorian, it is a Category 1 hurricane. It the eye of the center of the storm, it completely missed the island of Puerto Rico and went off to the east, and you can see it now working its way to the northwest. It's trying to form an eye-like feature in the deep convection here in the most intense part of the storm, but it's really wrapped up. It looked very impressive earlier on visible satellite, and the infrared satellite is showing the same thing here with thunderstorms surrounding the core of the system. There's no more dry air intrusion. There's no more wind shear inhibiting it, and this thing's really giving it a go, trying to beef up into a storm, and unfortunately that spells bad news for us on the southeast coast. I say us, I mean southeast coast, meaning Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, all need to be on alert. It's still possible, depending on how strong the ridge sets up. We'll talk about that in a minute. But everyone needs to be paying attention to the storm, but Florida needs to be preparing because it looks like the peninsula of Florida looks to take the brunt of this storm. So how did we get here? The Dorian was a tropical storm. It kind of jumped and relocated itself and reorganized, and when it did that, it jumped several hundred miles to the north and kind of reorganized itself, and therefore it was on the eastern side of the forecast guidance. So it was automatically, the models were initializing incorrectly, and it was just not, it kind of relocated itself, and that threw the models off for a couple of runs, and it reorganized, and now it's turned into a hurricane as it's going north of Puerto Rico, heading toward the northwest, toward the Florida coast. So to kind of show that, there's a great website here from Mark Nissenbaum, a graduate student of Florida State University, and he shows radar image, and it's much clearer to see the organization of Hurricane Dorian on radar here. Here's the island of Puerto Rico. Here's the quarter of Hispaniola. This radar is out of San Juan in Puerto Rico, and you can clearly see the hurricane getting its act together, the eye wall becoming more intense with this intense banding around it, and it's completely closed off. Earlier in the afternoon, it was kind of ragged, but it's really giving it a go at trying to wrap up and becoming a powerful storm, thankfully missing Puerto Rico and waiting until it got away from any populated area to do so. And certainly something we have to watch. It's also increased in size, so a lot of factors going in that's kind of led to Dorian turning into a hurricane today, and we have to watch and monitor the situation as it continues to trek toward the Florida coast. It's a very great radar site, though. I would recommend bookmarking it at this URL up here. Very, very high resolution, great radar. Radar is a great way to track tropical cyclones because it gives you a true real-time imagery of what's going on. Sometimes a satellite, because they're positioned, there's something we call parallax, which is kind of the satellite can give a misleading view because it's higher up in the atmosphere and it's kind of tilted down more at the equator. So sometimes it can kind of give a skewed view, but radar shows you what's really happening in real time. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So I actually skipped over this part, but the most important thing to do when there are tropical cyclones active and you live anywhere if you're interested, but mainly for those states that have a coastline, you want to jump over to Google. You want to type in NHC. You want to click enter, and then the National Hurricane Center is your official source of all information and all things tropical. And you get to this landing page here, and you have the summaries of all the storms. Tropical Depression Erin is continuing to move off to the northeast. It is no threat to the United States at all. Maybe a fish storm and issue for areas up in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, but nothing for us here. The main story is Hurricane Dorian. You can see in the summary here that popped up maximum sustained winds of 80 miles per hour. The minimum central pressure has been dropping all day down to 990 millibars, and it's moving rather quickly northwest at 13 miles per hour. You can click that little icon and you're taken to this page with a lot of information, a lot of key information, but the most infamous graphic you'll see here is the forecast cone. This updates at 5 p.m., 11 p.m., 5 a.m., and 11 a.m. Eastern time, or in daylight saving time. And you can see here that they have adjusted the cone to, or the cone of uncertainty is what this is. So this represents anywhere that the center of the storm could be. The impacts are not confined to this cone. That is very important. They are not confined to the cone. That means if you live in Savannah, Georgia right here, that doesn't mean you're not going to feel gusty winds and heavy rains come Monday on Labor Day. Another point there, I'm going to jump aside here for a second. Labor Day plans should be fine in North Carolina. Do not cancel Labor Day plans. This thing would not get here until Sunday or Monday. down in this area. So don't cancel Labor Day plans yet. If you're down in Florida, I would reconsider, but there is no need to cancel plans here in North Carolina at the moment. Back to the focus here, though. The official hurricane track here has Dorian maintaining its hurricane strength and intensifying into a major hurricane by Saturday afternoon, and then making an approach on eastern Florida and making a landfall somewhere on eastern Florida as a major hurricane, which is certainly a big deal and much stronger than it was yesterday. And the reason for that is because it completely missed any land. A couple of days ago, we were talking about Dorian threading the needle here between the Mona channel between the Hispaniola and Puerto Rico here, and instead it relocated, it reorganized. Mother Nature kind of threw a curveball, and Dorian has skipped over the part where it was supposed to weaken by interacting with land. So that's why the forecasts are stronger now, and that's why it's anticipated to become a major hurricane in a few days. So what's causing this track? We can jump over to the forecast models here, and this is the GFS ensemble plot of 500 millibar geopotential height. That's meteorologist talk for basically the height of the column of air in the atmosphere. Without getting into too much technical jargon, just think of the blue areas as areas of lower pressure, the areas of red as a higher pressure. So if you have a lot of red, you have a ridge, and if you have a lot of blue, you have a deep trough or an area of low pressure. A tropical cyclone is an area of low pressure. A hurricane is an area of low pressure. So what we have here, you can clearly see Dorian here, and if we go forward in time, every time this animates, it jumps forward 6 hours. You can see Dorian kind of getting mixed up with another feature here. It's an upper level low, and it kind of gets tied up with that, but the rotation around area of low pressure is counterclockwise here. So it's going to throw Dorian up this way, but then after that happens, it's going to run into a ridge. A ridge is going to be building out in the western Atlantic here, and the hurricane cannot go through the ridge. It's a stop sign to the hurricane. It cannot go through that. So instead, it gets pushed off to the west, and it gets kind of jumbled here as I go forward because of the interaction and the uncertainty a few days out. But what is happening here is, if I go back a few frames, so here is Dorian here, and then this ridge oriented along this area, this kind of acts as a stop sign, and the rotation around this is clockwise around the area of high pressure. This is still counterclockwise. So it's kind of this funnel that's funneling Dorian toward the coast, and it's not able to recurve back out to sea. But keep in mind that if this ridge is weaker than modeled, then that edge becomes, in this area of the ridge, say that it only extends that far west, then Dorian is able to kind of slip and rotate around that. And I pointed that right toward North Carolina. That wasn't my intention, but it could go back out to sea. Again, anywhere in this area along the coast is still at risk for, hurricane impacts. It's just a matter of how strong that ridge is, and that's something that will become clearer as we get closer to, as the hurricane makes a closer approach to the southeast coast. So a similar idea is shown here in the European model, where here is Dorian down here, and the resolution is a little bit coarser on here because the European model, it has a more detailed look, but it has fewer time steps to not have as much data computation or workload on the model itself, because these are very intense calculations running it. And the same thing here, you have the ridge, this has an even stronger ridge extending all the way into Tennessee and into Alabama, and just off the coast of the Carolinas and the tidewater of Virginia here. And this upper level low down here is throwing it to the counterclockwise as well. So again, you have this funnel, but the European wants to take Dorian even farther south, and it's kind of hard to pick out where it would be on here, but it would be somewhere in this area that would have the greatest impact from Dorian. And the National Hurricane Center has been nudging the forecast cone of uncertainty down a little bit with each consecutive run, because a lot of the model guidance is showing that as well. Some individual runs were having some crazy solutions with the storm coming up to Wilmington and going out to clipping into the Outer Banks and making landfall in Savannah, Georgia. You can't take one run. One is an incident, two is a coincidence, and three is a pattern, is a good rule to live by with the models. If something is repeated 3 times in the models, that's something to take note of. That's a trend. So we have to watch that carefully as it does that. An important factor here is the sea surface temperature. So again, if I re-highlight the area down here where Dorian is expected to go, currently in this location, I thought that would turn blue. There we go. So Dorian is down here, and then as it continues to kind of track up this way in this general kind of arc,
it's getting over some really deep, really warm water. Down here in the Eastern Caribbean, it was warm water, but it wasn't exactly, deep. It wasn't a lot of ocean heat content, is what we refer to it as, some deep, warm water. So, with a storm being here, it's going to go over some very warm water. There's not going to be a lot of shear. It's going to encounter some shear at some point. A storm just simply can't be, exist for several days without some shear impinging on the system, but it's going to be minimal, so it's certainly not good news for Dorian trying to intensify. Something we have to watch carefully. Dorian has kind of gone in a period of what we call rapid intensification today. I don't know if it's actually met the qualifications for that, but it's rapidly turned from a run-of-the-mill average tropical storm to a Category 1 hurricane very quickly. So it's shown that it can kind of put the pieces together and do that, so we have to monitor that as the storm gets closer. One other point, talking about Florida here, for those who may not be familiar, I'm not super familiar with Florida's geography, but if we look here, this is a population density map from Columbia University. I'm trying to remember what this acronym stands for, but it escapes me at this time, but it's a great tool to look at population density. And what we can do here, just to kind of get some scale here, if I draw a polygon around the east coast of Florida, it's going to give us a output of the amount of people, and it's going to be several million, and 10,165,890. That's an estimation. There's no telling how many people actually live in the polygon I drew, but it's important. That's how many people are at risk here of having hurricane-like impacts. And again, with the storm kind of intensifying as it's coming to land, that's a scenario you never want to see when the hurricane is intensifying as it comes to land. So it's certainly a concerning forecast, but as long as we are prepared and as long as preparations take place and we have these several days of notice, preparing for the worst and hoping for the best is the best that Floridians can do. And we will stand by here in the Carolinas and watch and hope that the system, hopefully it recurves out to sea, but that doesn't look likely as that ridge kind of builds in and forces the storm to do so. So I'm going to jump back over here to the hurricane advisory. Thanks to everyone who's tuned in. I wanted to keep this video a little bit more brief because I upload these to YouTube right after, and I've been rambling on for several minutes, up to 15 plus minutes, and that doesn't make for a very happy computer when I try to upload that video. So before I jump back to the advisory, I did want to that point, this was a tweet from Steve Bowen. Why so much focus on Florida with big weather events, population increase? And this is a map showing Florida population increase just since last year, since 2017 when Hurricane Irma came through and ravaged the Keys and the southwestern part of Florida, and then 3.52 million since Wilma in 2005. And that was back the very rough year of 2005 back in the Atlantic when we had Katrina, we had Rita, we had Wilma, Stan, and all kinds of large hurricanes. That many more people live in Florida, and these red counties show where the population has exploded down here in Miami, Tampa, Orlando, up here in Jacksonville. But there's a lot of people that would be, in this cone of uncertainty for the storm to go. So Florida is a rapidly growing state, and that's why it's such a big deal. There's a lot of people down there that have a lot to lose here, and that's why the forecast is so concerning for an intensifying hurricane as we go toward, as Dorian approaches the coast. So Teresa asks, so does the dry air is not going to help? There's not really a lot of air. I wonder if I can bring it up here. I think I can. If I back out to a water vapor loop, I can quickly do this. Yeah, it's going to take a few minutes to buffer here, but dry air is really not going to be a problem. It's kind of a very untapped atmosphere that Dorian's going to be going through, which is not good news because it allows it to strengthen more. And there's another question popping up. I'll get to that in a second. While this kind of buffers here, there's not a lot of dry air. So dry air is going to be indicated on this map by these darker colors and kind of the shadowy looking area down here. There's some drier air. But up here, there's a lot of moisture. The Bahamas is a very moist part of the Atlantic, at least for this point in time. So Dorian's going to have a lot of untapped potential in terms of strengthening. So that's something we have to watch. Can you let us know anything about Florida Gulf Coast? What does it look like? East will take a hit. So that is a good question, Teresa. There are some models. I haven't gone to that point yet, but if we go back to the advisory, some models do have the hurricane going back over the Gulf and then maybe recurving back and maybe having an additional strike on the Gulf Coast somewhere. That's kind of unclear at this time, depending on how strong the storm is. If it's coming in this direction and hits eastern Florida, it's going to continue and go into the Gulf. So that's something we have to watch. I think by the 11 p.m. update, maybe by tomorrow morning when we wake up, the cone of uncertainty will extend out into here, and we will see what the National Hurricane Center thinks is going to happen with Dorian. But we're still banking on it to make this left turn here, so we need to watch that carefully. So I can't really answer that question. It's several days out, still unclear. But I would definitely prepare if you're in eastern Florida right now, because the entire state of Florida, with the exception of maybe the Keys, are in the cone. But again, the cone represents where the center of the storm will be, and the impacts are not limited to the cone of uncertainty. So thank you all for the questions. I think I'm going to wrap the video up here, and I'm going to post it on YouTube as well. If some people like watching through YouTube better, I have some people on YouTube that watch that aren't on Facebook. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'll do another update when we have more information. But right now we are dealing with a strengthening Dorian. I'll leave here on the radar image. You can see the eye wall wrapping up rather nicely, which is concerning as it continues its trek toward the southeastern U.S. Thanks for watching again. If you have any questions, let me know. Stay safe and stay tuned to the National Hurricane Center for official forecast information and for the latest official information. Thanks for watching.